Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the most shocking secret you have uncovered and you can't stop thinking about it? Please remember to like, share, hype, and subscribe. There was this older woman who lived on our street, little disheveled, mid-50s, kinda kooky, but otherwise very nice. She would always talk to us about her kids, her friends and family, her job, and all these plans. Turns out, none of those people existed. She was unemployed and got a check each month due to her mental health condition. She got on the radar of Adult Protective Services because she rolled her own cigarettes, ran out of paper and used a newspaper. She got ink poisoning. They found so many dead cats, and apparently she didn't have plumbing for a number of years, so she would shit in a Lowe's hardware bucket and then come outside to talk to the neighbors about her made-up life. They just had to tear the entire trailer down because it was unlivable. Apparently in Montana, they have no idea where the bats go in winter to hibernate. They check the caves, the bats are not there. They don't know where they go. I have a couple, but I'll give you this one. Early 1910s, my great-grandmother and her sister lost their mother to consumption, tuberculosis, when they were young, and my great-grandfather didn't want to or couldn't take care of them, so he sent them to a local orphanage. My great-grandma ended up being fostered by a couple who couldn't have children. At least 3 died in infancy, while her sister was left out. According to my great-aunt's autobiography, she wasn't taken in by this couple because my Gigi was the pretty one. Well, we now know this couple were not exactly the best and were heavily involved in the local KKK. Anyway, my great-aunt, who I'll just call Ga, was passed around between multiple foster homes who treated her poorly all the way through her teen years. Then, when she was about 20 and living in the city studying to be a nurse, she wrote that she met a man who she called the love of her life in the early 1920s. I'll call him NF. It was a whirlwind romance for her, especially for someone who hadn't experienced a lot of love in their life. NF had money, as he was a CEO of an oil company, a very well-known man, and was the life of the party. The two were married within months of meeting. Unfortunately, their marriage only lasted a little over a year and a half. NF died of natural causes at the age of 31 while in his office at work. For a long time, this is all our family knew. So, our state has been getting press recently due to a book, A Fever in the Heartland by Tim Egan. It's about the KKK, how they ran this city, Indianapolis, in the 1920s, the Grand Dragon, D.C. Stevenson, and the woman who eventually caused the organization's downfall. With all the new eyes on the KKK today, I decided to start digging into my family tree to see who was involved. Of course, I already mentioned the couple who adopted my GG, but I also discovered my GA's love of her life was a Kleagle, aka KKK recruitment guy. And, after more research into old newspapers, it turned out he was one of Stevenson's right-hand men, and even testified in front of Congress in favor of the Klan and to prevent Klan members' names from being released in the newspaper. I'm pretty sure my GA was partying it up with NF and the Klan at Stevenson's home just a mile from where I currently sit on my couch in my own home. It's bonkers to have discovered this all because of my own research. As far as I know, no one in the family knew about these associations with the KKK, or more likely, refused to discuss it, and are now dead, so the questions can't be asked. All I'll say is this. NF deserved the heart attack in his office at the age of 31, the Klan. Also, my great-grandfather, on the other side of my tree, had a second wife that no one apparently knew about. He drove her to suicide within a year of being married. He also abandoned her at the altar at least once, and was also a horrible man, but probably too poor to be involved in the KKK. parent randomly dropped the fact that their uncle was murdered at 16 and either their grandfather or the sheriff's son did it. Not really sure if it's a secret, but I discovered the way one of my great aunts died was by suicide. Oh, but just not any old normal suicide, no. She did her usual routine, got dinner cooked, sat at the table, and was literally in the middle of dinner when she excused herself. From there, she went to the bathroom with her gun and shot herself, while the rest of the family was still at dinner. I asked, apparently, her husband was a good man, at least how it seemed to everyone else, and wasn't abusing her, nothing like that. It's just our family is really mentally ill, which honestly I can't say if her husband had anything to do with her death, but I can confirm we all have tough brains, so her just deciding to do that doesn't surprise me too much. A client of mine admitted to me that it was probable her brother was the father of her baby. It's been almost 40 years, but she's one I still think about. I found my diagnosis papers my parents were hiding from me. For years they gaslit me into trying to make me believe it was only mental. A previous girlfriend told me I have something I should tell you but can't, and I've never told anyone. For whatever reason I just said, does it have to do with your uncle? I had a weird feeling about him from day one. She was so young when it started. I convinced her to talk to her family about the situation, in case he was doing it to other kids. They forgave him instead. My uncle, who I was incredibly close with and always looked up to, has not one but 2 daughters that no one, I'm assuming even him, knew existed. The first one matched me on Ancestry a year or so before he passed. He had dementia, so I obviously never told him about it. And then I just happened to stumble across another one a few months ago, also on Ancestry. I ended up telling my oldest cousin about the first one after my uncle passed, since she expressed an interest in maybe reaching out, and she wanted me to run that past my cousin before she did so. There weren't any surprises. I also wanted at least one of my cousins to be aware, because if I found out that a family member knew I had random half-siblings out there and didn't tell me, I would feel pretty betrayed. I haven't mentioned the second one yet, but they aren't asking any questions, so I'm just going to leave it alone for now. The things revealed by Ancestry DNA tests. Last year I found out that as a child I lived on the same block as a serial killer fugitive who escaped from us and Mexican prisons. Almost nobody knew. A very close friend of theirs revealed their identity a few years after they died. I'm a mail carrier. A customer that I talk to every day handles all the bills and expenses for her son's business. She's always complaining how he never pays his debts, so I asked her, why can't he handle this himself? She then proceeded to reveal he has multiple warrants out for his arrest, so she has to be the one to take care of things through her power of attorney. He has 7 kids. The day after I followed my sister's plan of care and had her life support turned off, after a tragic surgical outcome, I found out my half-brother, her stepbrother, used to SA her as a teen, and I had to be the one to make sure he didn't come to her service because not many people knew. She never told me because she didn't want me to carry it. She didn't tell our dad because she was sure he'd kill him, and I would grow up without a dad. My half-brother is a respected, trusted person in our community. He was also always the golden child in my mother's eyes, without a doubt. Growing up, I was told one of my grandfathers was one of 12 children. Found out no, he was one of 12 legitimate children. There were at least 2 illegitimate children, but potentially a lot more, since great-grandpa was a very randy man who got around. Basically, I'm never dating anyone from the home mountain, as there's a good chance I'm related to them. I didn't know I had a second aunt until shortly before my Nana passed. She slipped up and said she raised 3 girls. When I asked my mother about it, she told me a nightmarish story about growing up with a middle sister who was evil and had made the family miserable. She lied to friends and family about abuse that had never taken place to gain sympathy and places to live. Over time, she burned every bridge afforded to her, but for many years, people believed evil things about my grandmother and grandfather. Decades later, the police reported to my mother that her sibling had died in an apartment in New York City, but by the time they found her, she was only skeletal remains. My mother doesn't accept her sister really died, that she's still out there, convinced she likely faked her own death to escape warrants and debt. I had this neighbor, a sweet old man living across the street all by himself. He had kids, but they didn't really show up. One was completely absent. The other had only hired a lady to look after his dad after he had a stroke and was not doing that well. Anyway, we had been neighbors for so long, and I am telling you, this was the nicest old man he'd ever met. Before his stroke, we would occasionally have a cup of tea together, and he would tell me the most interesting stories from his childhood and his work. He used to teach PE, so after his stroke, when at some point the lady that took care of him needed to go back to her country for a few days, I volunteered to check up on him myself for a few hours per day. So I'm at his house, reading from a book, not that he could understand it at that point, when I see a roach, and of course I have to kill it. So I go to the kitchen to see if there's insecticide, and as I look under the sink, I see what looks like a big hole, and I think that's where the roach came from. So I decide to close the hole, but I observe something in it. I take it out, and it's photos wrapped up in plastic. Photos of kids, naked kids, some as old as 4 and 5. After a lot of thought, next morning, I decided to call the police, only to find out that the guy had passed during the night. Dad's side of the family had an old-timer, I think my dad's great-uncle, living in a trailer deep in the middle of their wooded property. It was about an hour hike to it from my grandma's place. As the story goes, he's a total psychopath who got in serious trouble, and that's where he'd been living for decades. Nobody really said much about it, and would get absolutely livid if I brought it up. I met him once or twice when I was younger when my dad wanted something taxidermied. The dude had all kinds of pelts in his house, so I guess it was his hobby. There were hushed rumors that there were likely human remains near his place, and when he died about 15 years ago, it was confirmed there was indeed one human skeleton buried near his front porch. It gets worse, but I'll leave it here for now. Not entirely shocking, but still something I thought was very important not to tell anyone about at that time. There was this campsite me and my family used to go to on vacation every summer when I was a kid. The owner was a friend of my parents, and they'd hang out with other friends there all the time. Exactly how, I don't remember, but there was this well-connected French lady who'd known every famous or important person in the area, and she'd fix all kinds of things. Always friendly and helpful, and always there. I'll call her Claire for now, not her real name. A tour through the local wheat plant, visiting the private car collection of a wealthy entrepreneur, you name it, and Claire would arrange it. And she was friends with everyone in the whole region. I have no clue what she actually did for a living, other than driving around in a little French delivery van and connecting people. One day, Claire kind of accidentally mentioned that she was well acquainted with Tony Blair, and would frequent his summer house regularly to drink tea with him. But we shouldn't tell anyone about it, because it was meant to be a secret. Later, when we coincidentally drove past, she pointed out exactly where it was. I was barely a teenager at the time, and this seemed like a very big and important secret to keep. Also, I believed there was no reason to doubt this to be true. In hindsight, typing this, I start to believe she must have been a spy. We'd been invited to her little house, and she eagerly showed the Minitel or Viditel, can't remember, console, and how it would display messages from the municipality and other important communications. Basically an early form of an internet-connected PC, but limited in functionality. Definitely a great way to relay secretive information if you needed one, like for spying operations. Nothing like a sweet old lady neighbor spy. Pretty cool. But think about this, like we interact with people every single day. Could be people you could even be related to, and they may work in some level of intelligence, whether it's gathering or analysis, and you may never know. Interesting. If they're good at their job, right? My grandmother was married to a guy named Cartwright who lived in Idaho during the Second World War. For context, my family is and always has been in British Columbia. Nobody knew about it except for one close friend of hers. She would have carried the secret to the grave had we not discovered her marriage certificate from 1942 and the papers for her divorce from the same gentleman in 1944. She married my grandfather in 1954. Apparently back in the 40s, there were many illegitimate marriages done by mail of young women writing to soldiers on active duty. There was incentive to be wed to a soldier for his pension. These women would get the man's identity and signature via mail. Back in the 40s, that's all you needed to gain a marriage certificate from your local municipality. This is just my speculation, but I'm not certain this marriage was mutually consensual. According to my grandmother's friend, they never met each other in person. They were pen pals, living in different countries. He was in the field in Europe the whole time they were in touch. Her friend claimed lots of Canadian and American women were doing this. It wasn't illegal if the man presumably wrote out his desire to wed and signed it off. I'm thinking what was to stop a woman from forging his signature and handwriting them. I know my grandmother's family was dirt poor in 1942. There was certainly an incentive. As far as I can tell of the law in my province, at that time, there was little to stop her from doing so. This is just my own speculation, though. Now, everyone who knows the truth is long gone. She passed away in 2001, when I was only 10 years old. I knew my dad won some money, but he didn't admit it for years. My parents got divorced, so my dad had me help pick out some cheap furniture to replace what my mom took, and I jokingly said, "What, did you win the lottery?" And his reaction was a little too hesitant for me, so I kept bugging him, even though he denied it, and he ended up settling on, "I'll tell you when you're 18. But it was years after that when he told us how he hit big at the casino. The timing with the divorce was so bad, he couldn't tell us or surprise us with things like he'd wished he could have, but he at least gave me props for being the only one who noticed the little change and called him out. I'm hoping that good luck is genetic." I found when I was 12 to 13 that who I thought was my bio dad wasn't. My actual bio dad is a relative's friend, and said relative refuses to talk about it. Bio dad has kids and a wife. None of them openly admit they are related to me. The sisters completely shun me. Bio dad wanted a paternity test, but openly wanted to see my son or his grandson. I cut them all out about 3 years ago. No text, deleted numbers, removed him off my social media. The dad who adopted me, essentially, and is on my birth certificate, will be more of a dad than bio dad ever was or could be. It's taken me years of trauma to still work through it. Found out my great-grandmother was a mistress. She had been married and had 5 kids. Her husband then died. She was a housekeeper for a doctor, and they ended up having an affair. She went on to have 4 more kids with him. The whole town knew, as obviously her husband was dead, yet she kept getting pregnant, and from what I hear, the kids greatly resembled the doctor. The doctor never formally acknowledged the children and stayed with his wife and family, shocker. So my grandmother's siblings had half-siblings in the same town. Everyone knew about the siblings and half-siblings included, yet everyone pretended otherwise. Madness. Apparently it wasn't a secret, just something no one wanted to tell my generation about, but one of my grandmother's cousins was smuggling weapons into the States and keeping them at my grandmother's house when my mom and her sisters were kids. I got curious after college when I met that cousin's brother's wife and learned the smuggling cousin was most likely murdered on the other side of the world, and it may or may not have been covered up by the local police. Found out my great-grandpa was jailed for bigamy in 1917. Within a year of his release, he married my great-grandmother bigamously. Man dumped his first wife and 2 kids, then the second wife and a child, and then ended up staying with my GG. Had 13 kids with her. Found out my grandpa only went to the Second World War because it was that or jail. He was a black marketeer, robbed trains for goods to sell, and the aforementioned bigamous great-grandpa shopped him to police for it. My parents got old while they discovered technology. I'm talking email, smartphones, texting, etc. Just the real basic stuff. Anyway, my father always seemed to be angry with me while growing up. I'm talking all day, every day, just annoyed with me. This was also confirmed by my siblings over the years. It was like they felt sorry for me, so I know I wasn't totally going crazy. Years later, at the age of 45, my father sent a group text to my immediate family, basically complaining that he had to take a call from me on his birthday. Not even his real son, a real annoying ass. Called me a fag. I'm straight, but still odd. He went on and on. The message was directed at all my siblings, but the old dude inadvertently included me. They all sent laughing emojis, thumbs up, and similar bullshit. It was then I realized I wasn't his son. It all made sense. It's been almost 10 years now. Siblings have reached out numerous times. I'm not a dick. I told them I'll always have love for them, but I'm done participating in the so-called family. It's over. I think I'm happier now. Well, maybe more relieved than happy, but life happens to all of us. It just feels weird that it happened to me, I guess. When my grandma died a few years ago, I told my aunt that I wanted to do a DNA test to find more relatives in Poland. She told me not to do that, and after pestering her for a few minutes for no reason, she told me that my grandpa might have AR'd my grandma's teen sister when she was in America from England. Teen sister got pregnant. They think my other aunt is born from the R and raised as my grandparents' child. I'm no stranger to criminal grandfathers, as my maternal grandfather Ard and beat his kids, was probably gay. He hung out exclusively with bi and gay men, and definitely had kids with a few other ladies. Neither of those secrets shocked me. I knew material GPA was a piece of shit, and I knew that my dad hated his dad, so he couldn't have been too great. I guess the most shocking thing I found out on my own was that a musician friend of mine likes women on his face. Pretty harmless, if consensual, but still surprised me. Ugh. I was adopted. Found out when I was in my late 50s and both parents dead that my mom had trapped my dad into marrying her by telling him she was pregnant. 8 years later, they adopted me. Then, 4 years later, my sister. We always knew we were adopted. And soon after that, my dad discovered he was medically unable to have children. He left her for a summer, hard to remember, then came back. Cue the yelling, slamming cupboards, and constant anger at me or my mother when he wasn't around, when he was at work. When he was home, she was Mrs. Perfect, smiling, beautifully dressed, great cook. When I found this out, everything finally made sense, and it was such a relief. It wasn't me, as she would constantly tell me. My sister became an introvert and essentially a recluse just because she saw what I was going through and wanted to be invisible. This is less shocking than sad, but I've been thinking about it ever since I found out. My whole life, I was always told that my grandma and her 2 older siblings had been orphaned when her father died of a stroke, and her mother died a few weeks later of a broken heart. They were subsequently taken in and raised by their dead mother's sister. Recently, I was doing a little recreational Googling of my ancestry, and I came across some records for my grandma's birth date. Her mother's death date was actually 4 months before her father's. Also, there was a 3-year-old child whose death date was listed as the same day as their mother's. The child was never mentioned by anyone in the family. It was like he never existed. My grandmother was 8 years old when her parents died. So, there was basically 0 chance that she didn't remember her 3-year-old sibling who died on the same day as their mother. I wasn't able to find anything on the cause of death. So basically, all my family has been telling a false story about my grandma's extremely traumatic childhood for decades. My grandma is now dead, so I can't ask her about it. And I don't want to upset my dad by asking about or reviving something he may not know and may not want to know. My mother participated in a murder back in the 60s. The guy who killed the victim was my mother's boyfriend. She witnessed and assisted the murderer to gain access to the house because she knew the victim. According to the news article, she testified against him in court and did not get any criminal charges. She told me she had been in trouble with the law, didn't elaborate at all, and told me that was why her parents wrote her out of the will when she was younger. Me being curious, decided to look into it when I found the news article. I still can't stop thinking about it. The guy was brutally murdered. I don't speak to her anymore, so I can't ask her for details, only what I read.